My name is Jeff Kaplan. I'm the Managing Director of THINKstrategies. THINKstrategies is a consulting company that I created back in 2001 to focus in on the transformation of the technology industry from being a product-centric to being a services-driven market. Back then, and there are a few people here I think can remember that far back, we were talking about ASPs and utility computing. Of course, today we're talking about SaaS and cloud computing. And my task today is to give you a little update on what's happening in the SaaS marketplace, where we see the ISV community going, and what, as a hosting industry, we could do to take advantage of those trends and to capitalize on these business opportunities. Now, in the course of this talk, I'm going to talk about a number of things. I'm going to talk about market drivers. I'm going to talk about key challenges that the ISVs and SaaS community are facing. I'm going to talk about opportunities for the hosting community as a whole. But I'm more than happy to talk about other things along the way that are related to those topics, so don't hesitate to raise your hand. We are recording this session, at least I think we're recording this session, and therefore I may repeat what you ask in terms of a question. So do me a favor, keep the question short just so I can properly recite what the question was, okay? All right, so with that in mind, let's start at the beginning. Why are we here? And in fact, this story has been evolving over the past decade or so. It's a story that we saw begin to take shape with the bust of the dot-com era. The fact of the matter is that over the past decade, we've seen a lot of ups and downs in terms of macro market trends. We've also seen a significant change in customer attitudes. And along the way, we've seen a tremendous acceleration in enabling technologies, which have helped to make the ideas of ASPs and utility computing a reality in today's marketplace. So let's drill down a little bit on a couple of these items. In fact, we're going to drill down on all three of them. On the macro market challenges front, the four challenges that we've seen over the past decade, which I think everybody can relate to, has to do with the economic uncertainty, which continues today, the changing nature of the competitive landscape. The world has gone flat, as we well know. The changing nature of the workplace. We're all more mobile, we're all more remote, we're all more dispersed than we've ever been before as a workforce. And as a result of the devices that all of you are using, half of you are already taking pictures of my slides. And by the way, if you want the actual slides, just leave me your cards and I'll be happy to provide them, all right? No problem. And with that, with these devices, we've all begun to have a different sense as not only consumers, but the terms that are thrown around nowadays are prosumers and bizzoomers, B-I-Z-zoomers. We all have a different set of expectations about how we access and utilize business applications. So it's not hard to understand where those attitudes come from. They come from a long history of failure in the software industry. These numbers were taken from a variety of sources, but when you put them all together, they don't paint a very good picture about what the software industry has been able to accomplish up until recently. The fact of the matter is that using enterprise software is kind of like building a house. Anybody ever try to build a house? Okay, so you try to build a house. Very often it takes about twice as long as you expected to finish a job, and maybe even cost you twice as much as it would have cost you when you first budgeted for it, right? I don't want to bring any pain back here, but the fact of the matter is when you got done, there might have been some loose edges to the framework that you wish you could have done better, right? The fact of the matter is that's the experience that most people have with traditional on-premise legacy enterprise apps. So you see these stats from a variety of sources. The fact of the matter is that the picture has not been good for enterprise applications. And if you look at the leaders in that marketplace, whether it's Oracle or SAP or even Microsoft, they're moving to a different model because they're being driven by a growing sense of frustration among their customers. And when you have, by the way, former executives from the software industry actually chronicling the failures of that industry, you know you're in trouble. And the author of this particular book happened to work at Lotus, among other places, okay? So obviously in today's tough economic times, that formula of failure can no longer be tolerated. Not only are end users frustrated by the lack of friendliness of those applications, but of course corporate executives are not very happy with the lack of return. So along comes the devices that we're all used to on a daily basis, and this idea of apps materializes. Now, we all have a short memory, but how many people can remember talking to members of their families about apps more than a year ago? Nobody in our families, unless you come from a pretty technical family, talked about apps over a year ago. Now apps is what everybody talks about. Now, I happen to have 3 boys who talk about them all the time. And the fact is that this empowerment of the consumer, and as they move through the doors of their offices, the corporate decision makers, has changed the way in which everyone looks at the use of applications and where they want to get those applications. And I don't know about you, but I have been ridiculed many times, despite the fact I'm seen as something of a visionary in this marketplace. My 3 boys, who are now 23, 20, and 16, make a habit of laughing at Dad because even today, I'm one step behind with my BlackBerry versus their smartphones. And I just love this cartoon that I found somewhere on the web in which the young boy says to his mom, "Why does Grandpa have a phone stuck to his wall?" And nobody wants to be tethered to their walls anymore. And in fact, I have to admit, even here in the Boston area, it's nice to see any kind of construction given the economy, but I can't understand why people are still building office buildings. I mean, who works in office buildings anymore? I don't know anybody who works in an office building. And because of that, you know, the line of demarcation that we see between our consumer lives and our corporate lives continues to blur at every level. And just as about 5 years ago, most corporate executives would have really cringed at the idea of using instant messaging within their organizations, and now it's the norm within most companies I do business with. The fact is today, a year ago, they would have cringed at the idea of using some form of social networking, and now it's becoming more and more pervasive. In fact, companies like Microsoft are spending billions of dollars acquiring companies like Yammer to help them move in this direction. So it's not only a different form of consumption, it's a different form of software that we're seeing permeating the marketplace and redefining enterprise apps. And it means it has to be available 24/7 from anywhere in any form, through any device. And that puts the service provider in the middle of a tremendous opportunity. And there are a growing array of service providers out there, many of them trying to capitalize on this market opportunity through an assortment of marketplaces. And the folks over at Gartner have gotten hold of this trend, and they're suggesting that about 90% of cloud services, first of all, are going to be driven by the consumer, but they're going to be delivered through these connected devices. I would suggest it's 100%. 100%. And it's going to happen probably before the end of the year. Now, the reasons, again, this is happening is the frustration over the old model for acquiring and using software. No longer can organizations afford to put the bulk of their capital investment budgets into buying hardware and software that's going to sit behind 4 walls. It's inevitably going to require an endless stream of customizations because of their complexities, and require a top-down dictation to the end users who are frustrated with their inefficiencies. And no longer can a lot of organizations afford to support that operation entirely on their own. In fact, they would prefer not to do so. But they're not too happy with the results of outsourcing the entire mess to someone else who they expected could do it for less, but in fact do far less with what they're given than they may have done internally themselves. In fact, if you look at the statistics, over 50% of the major outsourcing deals of the past decade have failed to achieve their business objectives and have either been terminated or substantially restructured. So outsourcing hasn't worked as an alternative to doing it in-house. So what organizations are thinking about instead is finding a more flexible method of acquiring the functionality that software has to offer and the systems that support them have to offer without necessarily buying the hardware and the software to make it happen. They're looking for more simple to use utilities that can be accessed more easily from anywhere so that it gains a greater return because it gets higher utilization. And as a result, they're actually willing, in some enlightened cases, to take the direction of their end users and watch how the software adoption permeates up the organization as opposed to down from the CXO suite. What I refer to as an outtasking versus outsourcing scenario. Now, this book came out a few years ago, but I still love it because it really captures the essence of what we're talking about here simply in its title. Why buy the cow when all you need is the milk? And in truth, this book was commissioned by WebEx prior to WebEx being acquired by Cisco to help to promote the concept of services versus buying software. But what it really talked about was this idea of outtasking, the idea of subscribing to specific kinds of services to meet particular business requirements. Now, in the hosting environment, this started to take hold with the idea of managed services a decade or so ago. And if you look at what's happened with the IT services industry, there's a lot of controversy about moving from break-fix to an ongoing managed services model. And there's still a few companies that are trying to get their heads and their arms around that business transition. In your business, where selling services has always been at the core of what you do, this should be a more natural evolution for you. It's not necessarily an easy one. So let's talk about specifically how this software as a service marketplace is evolving. And by the way, we'll define it very briefly here, because there are some religious arguments about how you define software as a service. The ideal is obviously around the term multi-tenancy, because that ideal is what makes the perfect software as a service solution scalable and economical. But there's more to it than that, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. I'm going to hold that very important piece back for a moment. However, software as a service is in the eye of the beholder, because we do have a number of vendors who are more than happy to have you host their application on a single instance basis across multiple companies and sell it as a service on a subscription basis. But anybody who's tried to do that knows that there are operational challenges associated with that. It doesn't scale quite as easily. And it's also more likely to be susceptible to customer demands for customization, which makes it even more difficult to get the economies of scale that you're looking for. However, if the customer perceives it as a service, they're thinking along the lines of that's software as a service. You have to decide whether you want to educate them about a more pure multi-tenant approach. And there are other kinds of models in between. Oracle, for instance, has its pod idea, and there are others like that. But the fact of the matter is that there's a proliferation of players all claiming that they have these software as a service solutions. Now I reference here THINKstrategies, in addition to having a consulting business, which is the bulk of the time I spend doing my work, we also launched 2 online directories about 5-6 years ago. One was called the Managed Services Showplace. The second one was called a Software as a Service Showplace. And a year ago, about a year and a half ago now, we merged those 2 together to form a cloud computing showplace. And anybody who's got their smartphones, their iPads, or even their laptops, you want to look up cloudshowplace.com. You'll find it very easily. And it has today over 1,900 companies listed across 90 different categories. Now I have to admit, as the founder of the showplace, we don't spend a lot of time policing who's on there and who's not. If they have a hosted version of a software app, we let them get on there because they're selling it as a service. But the point is, that proliferation of players is inevitably going to create a lot of confusion in the marketplace and make it more difficult for you to compete, because the shakeout is inevitable when you have just too many players. And there are a lot of players. And I'm convinced, by the way, 1,900 may be less than half of the total population of players. Those just happen to be the companies who found the showplace and added their name to the list. But nonetheless, let's talk about how they break into 3 important pieces at 3 layers, 3 levels rather. First of all, at the horizontal app layer, this is the way in which we see the marketplace evolving, but also the way in which we see customers typically adopting business-oriented apps. First, in the front office, because it's easiest. This is where the clandestine, shadow IT, consumerization of IT first occurs. I'm an end user, I'm a disgruntled Salesforce member, I decide I don't like the system that's in place, I go out and I find Salesforce.com. Or I've been assigned a project and I need to find some sort of app that helps me manage that project across a dispersed workforce. I find a project management tool. I don't ask anybody for permission. I find it, I see there's a 30-day trial or maybe even a free version. I subscribe and I'm on my way. And if I like it, I tell my friends. And if they like it, they might tell their boss that we should get this on a full-time basis. And it permeates up from there. But it starts on the edges. And it starts to work its way inside the organization. And when it does, lo and behold, the CXO suite finds out about it. And what's interesting today is we're seeing a rapid growth in corporate finance and ERP type apps from companies like NetSuite and Intact, Plex Systems in the manufacturing arena, and others, who are taking hold in the most conservative corners of companies and corporations at the CXO level, and often with the CFO, who's finding that this stuff is safe to use, scalable to use, economical to use, and secure as well. So they get happy with it. And then they say, well, maybe we can interact with our business partners using this stuff and with our customers using this stuff. And you're starting to see a growth in attention and activity around the inter-enterprise space. And anybody who pays attention to industry events, a few months ago you saw SAP acquire Ariba, driven by this very pattern. Okay? And there's another independent company I always refer to called Coupa, C-O-U-P-A, doing very, very well in that area. And you're going to see a lot more happening in this area. So this is the realization for anybody who goes back far enough to remember the idea of the extranet. This is the realization, the fulfillment of the promise of the extranet. Now, once the business apps begin to permeate the organization, the IT organization who supports the businesses says, you know what, we've been fighting this too long. We were wondering whether it was secure. We were concerned about whether it would scale, whether it was reliable. You know what? Our end users are happy. That makes us happy. we would be even happier if we had some of this stuff for ourselves because, the fact of the matter is IT management and network management software is almost as bad as business ERP systems. You talk to an IT person about NetView or OpenView or any of the other traditional network systems management software, and they're not very happy. So they're saying they'd like to get some of this stuff for themselves. But what they're also saying is maybe we can get some of this stuff to specifically focus in on our industry requirements. So there's a company I talk about on a regular basis out of Philadelphia called iPipeline. iPipeline is in the insurance industry. And iPipeline has SaaSified the insurance brokerage business. Now by that I mean, if you've ever dealt with an independent broker who's come to your home or come to your office, very often they'll ask you a series of questions about your business or about your family, and they jot down some information on their yellow pad, and they say, okay, I've got it, Mr. Kaplan. I'll be back to you in a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks with a proposal, and we'll be able to move on with the policy. And they come back to you with a proposal, and the first thing they do is they get your name spelled wrong, they got your address wrong, they don't remember how many kids you have or how many employees you have, and you say, well, screw that, he lost. But you also lost because you lost time, and you lost confidence in the process. That's a very expensive inefficiency. So what iPipeline simply did was they SaaSified or digitized that process. So rather than the yellow pad, they're using the iPad. And they're not only capturing that information more accurately, but of course, as soon as they hit submit, it moves up the process and through the supply chain more quickly and more economically. And as a result, they're seeing exponential growth in their business because of the economics and efficiencies they're creating for that industry. Now, there's another piece that I'm going to hold back on like I did before that's important in all of this, and it's a pivotal piece, but we're not going to talk about it right yet because instead, I want to get back to our friends in IT. So IT is saying, give me some of this for myself. I want a SaaS-based solution, and you're seeing many of them in the exhibit hall. Help me monitor, measure, and manage my IT and application environment. One of the hottest spaces in all of SaaS today isn't on the business side, it's in the IT community with application, monitoring, and management. And pulling together, by the way, historically, what's the word I should use here? Hostile parties. The network operations group and the application development group. Two groups that refuse to talk to each other for decades are now being pulled together through SaaS solutions where they have a common interface to see how the entire stack is performing, from infrastructure to app. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, and as a service provider, you have an opportunity to capitalize on a lot of these as well. Not only in performance management, but in storage and in security. So what we've seen is the clandestine adoption that intentionally circumvented IT, which ultimately has led to an acceptance across an organization and greater involvement by the CXO suite in the planning and procurement process. Now, what does that mean? It means, first of all, good news because the door is wider, but it means bad news because the bar is higher. They're setting higher standards as to what they're looking for from their SaaS providers and in turn from their hosting companies. The opportunity is for you to team with those SaaS providers to meet those higher expectations. Where things like compliance, your certifications can help those SaaS vendors. Where, in terms of strategic sourcing, these CXOs don't want to have to cherry pick the best of breed across every category and have dozens of different SaaS companies they're dealing with. They rather have strategic sources that can bundle them together into a more cost-effective vendor management program. So, anybody who doesn't yet know the characteristics of cloud, I highly recommend you actually refer to the government. Because this is one place they've done a pretty good job in defining what we mean by the cloud. And basically what they've done is they've aggregated a variety of opinions here. And you can get this document, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies document, on the apps.gov site. Download the latest version of the Word document, which contains this framework for how the cloud is typically defined. Great document, all right? Now, like with any technology trend, what was created to help simplify our industry has in fact evolved into something that's become very complicated. And part of it is because of marketecture as opposed to real architecture. You know, what I talked about before, the varying companies with their own particular intents in mind, of course, are to a certain extent bastardizing the terminology of SaaS and cloud to serve their own purposes, what some people refer to as cloud washing. And this graphic that was put together by a friend of mine, Peter Laird, when he was actually back at Oracle, is, as you can see, 4 years old. So you could take that kind of mind map and you could spread it out even further in terms of categories. And as you saw in the previous slide, I have 90 categories in my showplace, my cloud computing showplace. And if you go to IDC or Forrester or Gartner, I'm sure they've got far more categories. And none of them match, by the way, right? The point is, there's a challenge. Customers are concerned, they're frustrated, they're confused about these complexities. You flip that coin over, there's a wonderful opportunity for the trusted provider who can help them sort through these piece parts and put together the right programs and productized services to meet their needs. They're looking for that trusted supplier. Now, where are their concerns? Well, they typically run this route, starting with, is this stuff reliable? If I point and click, am I going to find my app? Is it secure? Can I trust that my use of this on-demand application isn't going to be compromised in one way or another? Can I integrate it with my existing operations and my existing business processes? Can I manage it and govern its use so that I don't end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or even worse, behind bars? And can I use it to gain a competitive advantage? Now, all of those questions are going to come up as you move from end user who's just looking for tactical, daily requirements to meet their day-to-day needs up into the CXO suite. But ultimately, all of these add up to one important value proposition. That's support. Who can I turn to as a corporate decision maker who's going to give me that support? Who's going to help me answer these questions, and most importantly, if something goes wrong, who I can call. And most recently, with the latest round of problems that Amazon has had, once again, the question came up, where's the 1-800 number I call if I can't get access to my apps or my services? That alone is an important competitive differentiator, support. Because if you're providing a business service and you can promise quality support, if you're talking to the right customer, they'll pay for that value. Or all you have to do is wait until they get burned, and they'll come back looking for that kind of support. Now, some people think this picture is one of myself, because they may know that I am, in fact, a cyclist. But I promise you, I've never done what this guy is doing. I've never worn a suit and tie while I ride my bike. And I haven't kept my head down that long because I know there's usually a truck coming. But the point of the matter is that what we're all in the business of doing today is better serving customers because we're all living in a more highly competitive marketplace. So that means we have to understand that buyer. where, when, and why they're buying what they're buying. How they behave, what do they prefer, when are they at risk of abandoning us and going someplace else because of something we did. Now this is where we get into the idea and the dimension of all of this, which I think is most exciting and most pivotal. And that has to do with being able to track that behavior. Now this is a controversial topic because a lot of people see the big brother aspects of this, but increasingly people are also seeing something else materializing here. Now the fact of the matter is there's a lot of data. Every time you turn on that smartphone or device, someone knows about it. Every time you click one keystroke, someone knows about it. Every time you move, someone knows about it. That's good for some people, maybe bad for others. But the point is that there's a lot of data, big data. And someone asked me once to define big data. And the way I describe big data is if I have more data than I know what to do with, I have a big data problem, okay? But the fact is a lot of people do, and again, referring to some Gartner stats, over 85% of the biggest companies are going to fail to capitalize on that data. Sometimes I think being a smaller company gives you an advantage. You don't have as much data to start with, so you can actually manage that data better as you go along. Now, where does data come in when we talk about SaaS? As I said, this is a brave new world. In the old days, when you delivered an app to a customer and left it at the back door for them to fend for themselves, you had no idea what the end user was doing with that software. Not only did that make it more difficult to support their needs, it made it impossible for you to anticipate their needs. Now, every keystroke is being recorded. And if you're not paying attention, you're going to lose in a competitive war. Because if you watch the best vendors out there, the Salesforce.coms of the world, they're modifying their app on a daily basis because they're watching on a daily basis how their customers are using those apps and making little tweaks here and more significant changes there in order to not only respond to those behaviors, but to anticipate the next round of needs. That's the starting point. That's important, but that's just the starting point. The second piece is when you add to that individual analysis the ability to aggregate this data. Now this is where we get back to the core of the matter around what SaaS means, what software as a service means. If you're true to the concept of multi-tenancy, you're more capable of gathering information across the entire user base and aggregating that metadata, slicing and dicing that data to produce very important benchmark statistics. Not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of your customers. I'll give you a very simple example of this. There's a company up the road here. I'm a local guy, by the way. I'm based here in Boston. And it's a company I've been doing business with for a long time. Simple service, email marketing. Great company, constant contact. Now, truth is, when I first started to subscribe back in 2004, they were local. I didn't know what I was doing. I just grabbed the first URL I could find that said email marketing. And I stuck with them because they never really failed me. Now, if I went out shopping around today, there are 100 email marketing companies out there. But not only did they not fail me, but what they started to do, like Salesforce.com, was add more features and functions, just blend it into what I got every day. So every day was kind of an adventure. I turn it on, what's new today? Well, what became really interesting was a year and a half ago when I got a little letter from them saying, hey, Mr. Kaplan, you, like our other loyal customers, have been using our service for a long time, and guess what? I hope you don't mind, but we've been capturing that information. And guess what? We now have quantified the performance of various companies in various industries. And if you click here and look at this chart, you can see how you compare in the consulting industry with your peers for open rates, for click-through rates, and for other KPIs associated with email marketing. So I click, and lo and behold, there I was. Now, to be honest, I wasn't as good as a lot of them, but I was better than a few of them. right? And I was excited, not only because it helped me as a consultant today, but more importantly because I happened in my past life to launch the benchmarking practice at a market research firm some of you may remember called Meta Group back in the early 90s, which is now a part of Gartner Group. And back then it was a paper-based business and it was atrocious. Because we would send out these big questionnaires to these CIOs and say, hey, tell us what you're doing in your data center. And they would pass it along to their staff and say, hey, tell me what we're doing in our data center because I don't know. Because they had no stats. And we would get crappy information back and we would try to make it look good and sell it for a big price. The fact of the matter is now I'm getting it as a part of my subscription. I'm less likely to leave Constant Contact. And that chart, by the way, that they showed me the first time around has now evolved into a real-time line graph. So every time I do a campaign, as a part of my dashboard, it shows up. Now, there's a benefit to me. There's certainly a benefit to them. It's kind of like, with Amazon, if you buy a book, they say, oh, you like that book? You'd love this book. I don't complain about that. Even though I know in the back of my head someone's tracking me. I'm happy that they're telling me what the next book is I might want to like. Okay? So, what does that mean? You get better intelligence about your customers. You can better target your services. And if you better target your services to satisfy their needs, guess what? You're more likely to be profitable. And if you do that effectively, not only can you help your customers better communicate and collaborate and have a better experience, but you can create a sense of community among those customers that never existed before because now they're sharing information and maybe even sharing best practices and maybe even sharing, as we've done in the open source movement for years, sharing new ideas. And now you've got a competitive advantage because you're now building a stronger bond with your customers in an incredibly commoditized marketplace. So, SaaS can redefine who you are. Let's say right now as a hosting company you think you're in the software services business because you're hosting softwares and you're selling them as services. That's good, that's great. But wouldn't it be nice if you could move up the stack a little bit in terms of who you're talking to and the value proposition and say, you know what, these are not just software services. These are services that are going to help you better manage your business. They say, okay, that's great. I understand that. But how are you going to help me better manage my services? And you say to them, well, guess what? I have tools built into the way in which I operate that you can take advantage of, and I can provide you with the information you need to better manage your services and to get better utility and a better return from those services. Now, you're redefining who you are, what you do, and in fact, who you can do business with. In a highly competitive, highly commoditized marketplace, unless you do that, you're going to be stuck down here for a long time to come selling price rather than value. Okay? Speaking of which, even as you do that, you've got to continue to evolve. And the fact is, even on this idea of aggregated data and benchmarking, there were not a lot of folks who were interested in that a year or so ago. Part of it was because not too many people could actually produce something of value. Part of it also was because there wasn't a critical mass of users from which to generate that information. But as time moves on, more users come to the fore, more skills and tools are put in place, and lo and behold, you can deliver a different kind of value over time. Now, where's that value evolved from? Well, again, if you talk to someone today, if you talk to them over the past 10 years and you talk to them about hosting services, they say, oh yeah, I understand what you're talking about. You're talking about reducing my costs. I get it, I understand. And you're also talking about you can do it faster than me. I get it, okay, that's good, that's great. And you also talk a little bit about that means I get quicker time to value. All right, I got it, that's good. Certainly need that in these economic times. But can you give me more? Can you add value? Can you give me more functionality? This is where we're starting to talk about a strategic advantage. And if you can give me more functionality, can you help me as a business be more productive with that functionality? And can you help me innovate? Do you have a little consulting business or maybe a partnership with a consultant who can help me figure out how I can transform my business using your services? And can you help me gain a competitive advantage? So where are you going to top out as those customer expectations evolve? And as a result, what services might you offer to satisfy those needs? Now, the fact is that there are functional and there are business-oriented services. Infrastructure as a service is nice. Software as a service is better. Platform as a service, where people can actually start to create differentiated solutions, is pretty cool. Data as a service, where you start getting into some of this intelligence stuff, gets to be pretty interesting. But then there's a business process as a service, where you're not only saying, hey, I'll provide the hardware and the software and some of the skills, but maybe I can actually take that function over and do some data processing. And, the more things change, the more they remain the same. We talked about this in the late 60s and early 70s, if you go back far enough, about sharing services around business processes. So, this marketplace is evolving from one in which companies are simply looking for a best-of-breed solution in a specific area to meet the individual needs of an end user or business unit to something that is spanning an enterprise. Moving away from not only standalone apps, but moving to more scalable and secure platforms. Not only moving from horizontal to vertical solutions, but looking at ways in which it's not just about saving money, but adding value, greater functionality. And what's interesting is, not too long ago, everybody thought SaaS meant simplification and compromise in terms of functional capabilities of the app. You look at a Salesforce.com CRM system, you look at a NetSuite, you look at a number of the others, they're just as robust functionally. So they're not the compromises that there used to be. And the fact of the matter is that there's going to be a lot of different deployments of cloud environments. Public, private, community, hybrid are just the beginnings. Location independence is another piece of the puzzle. Where will that cloud sit? How will that cloud operate? How will it be interconnected with other clouds and on-premise resources? You as service providers are going to have to help your customers figure out which answers best meet their business needs. But most importantly, you have the opportunity to become, if you play that role, a strategic source versus just a best-of-breed player. And that's what they're looking for. They want someone who can help them sort through these alternatives. Because ultimately, that strategic relationship and the trust that's embedded in that relationship is your ultimate competitive advantage. And that's it. That's it. The fact of the matter is that this cloud world is starting to really clear on the horizon in terms of the opportunities that exist. And again, just like the term apps has become popularized, our friends at Apple and elsewhere have made the idea of the cloud more popular as well. You can't go into an airport, you can't turn on the TV, you can't talk to your teenager without hearing the term cloud pop up one way or another. And by the way, teenagers are the least likely to use the term because it just is what it is in their world. So if you're not ready to step up to the plate for our generation, if you're planning on sticking around anytime soon for a while to come, you're going to be confronted with that cartoon that asks, why does Dad and Grandpa have the phone stuck to the wall? You don't want to be the guy and gal with the phone stuck to the wall. You want to be the one who can talk in the same language to this new generation coming to market. Because I know that my 23, 20, and 16-year-old hopefully will be getting jobs sometime soon, hopefully. And I'm hoping that there'll be plenty of cloud services for them when they arrive. So thank you very much for your time. I know there's a keynote coming up momentarily. If you want, I'll hang around for questions. Otherwise, I appreciate you listening, hearing my point of view, and have a great day and good luck.